Hi there, I'm Nate Shear, your guide on Mindforce, the podcast for love, life, and learning, where we're all about love, life, and learning because what's on your mind really does matter. Today we have PJ Aubrey, and today we're going to be talking about how to use mental fitness to address a chaotic world, discussing easy mental health techniques anyone can use, as well as the role your attitude plays in our health and healing. So PJ, I want to give you the floor for the who, what, why. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you here?
Hello, I'm PJ Aubrey. I'm glad to be here. I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology from Brigham Young University in 2018. And ever since, I've been just an insatiable mental health advocate. So I guess you could say I'm here because I think we've all seen a decline in mental health, whether it's inside us or around us. And one of my missions is to help alleviate that as much as I can. I'm the host of the mental health podcast, A Survivor's Guide to Health, which is supposed to help you manage your mental health so your mental health doesn't manage you. And that's the
Awesome.
flip version.
Perfect. Do you have a specific story or anything that got you started in the mental health realm?
Yeah, well, my story goes back to the year everybody loves to hate, 2020. It was very rocky. I get the feeling we'll talk about it in more detail during our interview, but that was the year that I started the podcast.
Okay, sounds good. So that was kind of the turning point of COVID. Do you have anything from your growing up or history or, did you talk about mental health as you were growing up as a kid? What did that look like?
I don't think mental health was a very prevalent subject growing up, but I did have a pretty healthy family. So I don't think I was exposed to a lot of the traumas that are so common, at least in the United States. I used to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You might recognize them as Mormons. And I served a Mormon mission. And I saw a lot of different households, particularly like lower socioeconomic households. And that was my first real exposure to, I guess, to all different kinds of traumas and mental illnesses and how that can follow someone throughout their life.
That's interesting. It's interesting how over time we've talked about it more and more, and it seems like, we didn't discuss it at all. Even if we did have conversations and processing and whatnot, it just wasn't a, very specific thing. That's kind of the reason I started the podcast. I lost my grandma to mental health, and I think a lot of that, different generation, different time, the stigma is still there to a certain extent, but it was even more back then. And so it's just interesting to me, which interesting is probably not a powerful enough a word, but that we just couldn't talk about it. We couldn't move through these things. And that's why I kind of honed in on the title of mental fitness. I think it's one of these things that hopefully is an ongoing thing. You go to the gym and you get your cardio in multiple times a week. You're not waiting for the worst day of your life. You're not waiting to just jump on the treadmill one time and never go again. So I hope through these conversations and things like that, we're able to, make this more normal and, process things more openly. But before we start the interview, I wanted to give you a chance to ask a question to me.
Yeah, well, I guess it's the same question in a sense that you asked me. I'd love to know why you started this podcast and what you're hoping to achieve by increasing, mental fortitude, Mindforce.
Yeah, I'm active duty military, and so we go through a lot of different trainings, and we meet once a year and have a down day and talk about suicide prevention and different things like that. And it's just, I don't know what the answer is, and I think that might be one of the most difficult things, but the only thing I've really come to a conclusion for as a solution is connection, and I think connection comes from conversation. So initial title for the show would have been Sheeriest Conversations, a play on my last name is Sheer. I didn't want it to be about me, myself, and I also didn't want it to be, poking fun or making too light of the situation with mental health. So I kind of steer away from that. But I think that's the goal of the whole thing, is just having conversations and making it more normal. Being able to talk about the things that you're working on and the ways that you're working on it. I think that should be a common thing. It's really bizarre to me. I'm in the medical world, so I'm a healthcare administrator. And so it's odd to me that in health, we can prescribe things and talk about things when it's related to the body. And it seems like once it crosses over to the mind, which is still a part of the body, it just changes all the things, which is really odd to me. Like we talked about workouts earlier. I would love if people talked about how they meditated or sat here or went to church or, worked on these things and, how they're processing things. But it's like this weird thing you can talk about. Well, I'm doing 3x10 back and buys on Tuesday and Thursday, and I'm doing abs. We commonly, openly talk about the human body aspect of it, but it's like, I never see like someone, I'm sure it happens from time to time, but talking about the ways they're working on their health, their mental health, or mental fitness. I think mental health is a tough word for me. And that's why I kind of went the mental fitness route, because I feel like mental health has a negative connotation. It's a building, it's a place, it's a person you talk to. And like I said, it always seems like it's at the worst possible time, which
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way it was meant to be. And
Right.
I don't know why we're there. And hopefully the conversations, like you can have a reoccurring appointment with a therapist, and therapist itself isn't, a bad word either. So it's just interesting. But yeah, that's what I hope to gain. I hope, someone on the show or something that's said, get someone in the door to have, reoccurring appointments or really just anything to improve their life. Like sometimes I hesitate because I reach out for guests and things like that. And they're like, oh, mental health. Oh, I don't want to, that's too deep, or that's too really anything. Like we want to talk about journaling or coloring or I don't know, like anything that you believe will make someone's life better. Like we will sit here and chat about it and hopefully push it out. And someone will be like, oh, cool. I stop and, color within the lines. And that makes me feel better because it helps me process. Because
Oh, yeah.
I think they even did one on Tetris, right? I saw one on Tetris, like dropping the blocks on the screen and feeling that sense of organization, I guess, relieves stress. Like you feel better because the blocks are going away and things are coming into line. So even something as silly as, a Game Boy game from the 80s could help you feel better. If you want to talk about that, we'll do it. So that's kind of where it's at.
That's cool. What you said made me think of this gym. It's like 3 minutes away from my house. And every time you drive past it, it's got these huge, muscly trucks and Jeeps in front of it. I had a membership there, and I was the only minivan. There was nothing sexy about the car that I brought to the gym. But it's so easy to, it's more brag worthy to talk about how many reps you pulled and, how much weight you can lift, whatever. But, you don't really hear people bragging about, I finally broke through with my meditation today, or yeah, I got my new meditation coloring book today, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you and I can help make things a little more brag worthy when we talk about mental health.
Yeah, I would love to see it, sitting at work at the work center and someone's like, I have a bullet journal and I do this and it helps me process. And when I end the day, I cross stuff off and I feel better. Like, that'd be so cool to hear right next to the guy with the back and buys. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
That's awesome. So yeah, as we move into the interview, first question I had for you is your focus is the chaotic world we live in, which I think is awesome because one of my favorite things to say is we're all just trying to get through this crazy thing called life. There's no handbook. There's no rules. You just kind of try your best. And so the first thing I wanted to ask, in today's chaotic world, how do you define mental health? And why do you think it's becoming such a critical focus now over the last couple of years? Hmm. I think that's super important. Like, I think another thing, I don't know if synonym or whatnot, but purpose, right? I think purpose is just wildly important. Like when people leave a job after 20 years, especially like the military for my personal example, people, if they get involved and continue to do stuff, they do great. But some people will just completely crumble because that act of service and purpose is gone and they don't know what to do. So I've seen, some pretty difficult things where you lose that sense of purpose. And I think purpose and meaning are really close. It's interesting. It reminds me of an episode. I did one with my mom, which I still can't believe I squeezed my mom onto the show, but I lost my dad a few years ago. And so we talked about grief in the episode. And one of the questions she'd asked me is like, how do you process? And I still think back to the question because I don't think she likes my answer very much, but it makes me think of like perspective. And so mine is always perspective. Like it is a difficult thing. And I'm not saying, it's good by any means, but I was trying to think of the other people that things are going through. And so I guess I always compare, and I mean compare in a good way because I think compare kind of has a negative connotation to it. But I remember, it's just such a weird thing to remember, but there was that incident with the duck boat. I don't remember where that was, but some girl, I think she was in high school, she went to school and like her whole family was lost during the day on like a vacation tour trip. And so she lost mom, dad, sister, brother. I forget the makeup of the exact family, but I think of these situations where like, just reminded me of the concentration camp. There's like things that are so bad where like, I don't want to compare because like I said, I think that's not the right way, but just perspective, like things could definitely be worse. And so I didn't want to go through that situation. It makes me who I am and how I process things going forward. But that was my answer to her. I don't think she really liked that all much, but that's what makes sense to me is trying to like look at that perspective and the different things that are going on. So. And the meaning, I think, is really important, too. Like you said, my dad had almost been killed by different stuff. Like, he got kicked in the head by a horse. Like, that's enough to kill a human being. But, like, I always, like, wonder, like, there was meaning in that, right? Like, he's still here to raise me to a certain level so I could, join the military and accomplish goals and do things that I wanted to do. And, now I'm happy and set with my family and things like that. And so there had to have been some meaning. I think he got like struck by lightning. Like he's got some crazy stories. Like he probably shouldn't be here, right? So like meaning, right? Is that the right way to process meaning? Yeah, I try to reflect back on the good memories. So I think a lot of people think of like the what if, and you want to gravitate towards the what if, like the things they're missing out on now. But it's so much more meaningful and positive. You just think of all the good moments that you did have. But yeah, to gravitate off the deep and negative, I'm curious. We started to talk about COVID. I don't know if you want to go into that now, but with 2020 and things like that, why do you think that mental fitness is kind of becoming more prevalent and more in the foreground? Is it just because it was, something that impacted the whole world, or what are your thoughts on that? Mhm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And one thing I think that's interesting is like you had mentioned the social aspect and the isolation that went with that. Because one thing I still wonder, I mean, it's been multiple years since it's happened. But I remember we were in Japan at the time, so Japan and Korea were like fighting on who was going to lock down harder. So they put padlocks through the swing sets. That was one of my favorites. They put, wooden cutouts at the bottom of slides so you couldn't use them. They roped off the beaches. So even like the outdoor activity, you're like, oh, we can get outside and get some fresh air. No, can't do that either. And so one of the things I remember the most was that contact log. So in the military, I don't know if other companies or other people had to do that, but we had to have this contact log of all the people that you were within 6 feet of. And so if you had gatherings and whatnot, you couldn't have more than 4. But if you did, you had to have this contact log. And so my wife and I really like to have board game nights. That's something that we love to, play different things and have fun. And it was one thing that really started to drive this weird social divide. And I still feel it, even though it's been multiple years. It feels like people didn't recover, or maybe they're still like in the process of like working through that. But like people couldn't come together for so long because at least in the military, we got paperwork and got in trouble and like people got kicked out, and it was crazy during those times, specifically for COVID infractions. And so no one wanted to be seen with anyone. So that was pretty crazy. Did you see some of that same like interactions on the civilian world? Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. What would you say are some signs that we need to pay closer attention to our mental fitness, even if on the surface we feel fine? Huh. Do you have some personal examples of that grouchiness, just, lashing out, or what does that look like? Yeah, communication is always one of those things. We could probably work on it our entire lives. I'm not sure we'd ever become experts at that particular thing. It's like, how do you properly convey how you feel and what you need to get across without, being abrasive? And it's interesting because we talk about, how you talk. And I think that's one of those even probably more difficult things is body language and tone and things like that. It's like, we know what we said, and that's like 10%. Because I think it's like 86% or something is nonverbal. So it's the majority of what you do, like just how you're holding your shoulders is going to, say something different to your partner or your family. And it's even more difficult, I think, with kids. They pick up on all sorts of little things. I don't know. They probably know how you're feeling more than you do. Yeah, that makes sense. For those that are feeling overwhelmed, I know, like I said, I work in healthcare, and I think the military in general can be pretty overwhelming. What are some simple, easy to use mental health techniques that you can try right away? Hmm. Hmm. So in the current world, I feel like everything is faster and we're all about convenience, fast food. I mean, you can Google an answer to any question you've ever thought of in your entire life in a second without having to go to an encyclopedia like we used to. Everything is about faster. So I'm curious your thoughts on the breathing exercises in this world where it feels like there's just never enough time. What is a way to insert that in a normal? Because I'm assuming you'd want to get some consistency. You don't want to just do it once. So what's a way to get that into someone's life? Has people told you where they insert that? Okay. No, you're good. So if somebody was like, that sounds great, how do I start? What do you recommend for starting out with breathing? I mean, you said it's free, you don't need anything, but if someone wanted to get more into it, I think there's like the Calm app or is there video on YouTubes and things like that? YouTubes, wow. That's awesome. Yeah, and your second one, I wish I could remember where the research was because I know I've mentioned the show before, so I probably should go research it so I can actually back it up. But I saw somewhere where they talked about someone having an argument and they scanned their brain and they saw what parts of the brain lit up. And so they did it between an actual argument between a person and a thought of an argument. And so I thought that was super interesting because the same exact parts of the brain lit up. So if you're thinking about a thing that is about to happen or the thing has actually happened, it impacts you exactly the same. And so that reminds me of your second one. Like if you are saying the things in your head, if you are living it, then it is actually happening. So if you are going to have a great day and things like that, it's not, I think to back up, like you said, like it feels kind of hokey and things like that. But if it's playing in your brain, it is actually happening. I did. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So I'm curious, I've heard a lot more recently on journaling and other things like that. Do you encourage that also in daily habits? Mm, which I think is another powerful reminder just to reiterate over and over, but the balance of mind and body, right? So your pen or pencil is holding the thing, you're processing. Do you have tips or tricks? This is one I would love to do, but I just don't know what I would actually do. You free flow? Do you go with like prompts? Like, what does that first day of journaling look like? Hmm, that makes sense. Do you have journaling that sounds more like on the personal level? Do you have any journaling tips for, you said you're starting up the businesses. I've looked into bullet journaling. Do you have ways of checking stuff off and organizing things that still need to get done? Yeah, more like professional work related than, more about your day. Because that feels more kind of like a diary. Is there more on the journaling? Maybe journaling's not the right word, but yeah, about your professional life. Yeah, yeah. Mm, nice, nice. So you've emphasized the role of attitude a few different times. Can you walk us through how attitude can help in healing and your overall health? seems so accurate. There's just so many stories I can think of where you have people from the same family, and sometimes there is abuse or, divorce or whatever it may be, but you have one that seems to get on track, and I'd have to say it must be that internal dialogue, that positive thinking. And sometimes I wonder if it's not even positive, which, not to counter you at all, but sometimes people have, the axe to grind, or they want to, almost revengeful, which probably isn't the right way to do it. But there are, motivations where people are like, hey, I got to accomplish some things. And so that is really interesting how powerful that mindset from the inside can be, because, like you said, you can't control the external things. And so even the two people from the same exact house that maybe had a difficult time are going to come out completely different. It feels like it does a lot of times. Seems like one goes one direction, one goes another. Hmm. There's another one too, and I can't think of what the term is. Maybe you know it, but there's the one where, like, you're slightly uncomfortable for a really long time. So you're in a bad relationship, or you slightly don't like your job, but you'll stay for the longest time because it's not enough of a shock and awe. Like, if something's really bad, like if you had abuse in your relationship, you would leave because it's shocking. But there's the one, that's going to bug me now, where it's just slightly inconvenient. You're not at the place you probably should be, but you'll just kind of let it ride out. And that makes me think of the quote that you use where it's like, it's inconvenient, and, it's not the love of your life. It's not the job that, is your purpose or meaning, but you'll just kind of ride that out for like 20 years. But that is interesting how, as humans, we need like the shock almost, right? And it must go back to caveman, we're being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or something. Because if it's just like inconvenient, you'll just keep going, right? 'Cause I think you'll look back. I mean, it's obviously, like you said, easier said than done, but you'll look back in the 5 or 10 years and be like, oh, this was the thing I was meant to do. But you have to take the leap of faith. And I think everything's in life is about balance, right? Like, don't just leave your job and have nothing, and, you're living in your car because you didn't plan it out. But like, life is too short. Like I mentioned, I lost my dad. He was 50. And just some of that has just really stuck with me. I've always been an upbeat, happy person, and, pretty happy-go-lucky. But that's really been like a core thing for me, where like life is too short, and not in the way like YOLO, just throw money out the window and go crazy. Like, again, back to balance, but do the things that you want to do. Like, if you're unhappy or whatnot, like, try to change things, because you don't know. I mean, you could walk into the street and get hit by a bus. We just don't know. Like, 50 didn't seem like, someone was going to be lost at that point. You're like, oh, 80, 90, got, half my life left. So definitely, like, I feel like the kids want ice cream and it's late on a weekday. Like, who cares? To a certain extent, like, and that's what, to a certain extent, right? We can't load up all the time. But that's one thing I think I struggle with a little bit at work. People are like, oh, you just always seem upbeat and happy. Like, does anything bother you? I'm like, absolutely, things bother me. But like, at this point in time, it's just not anything that's going to take my joy for a whole day. There's just so many minutes and hours in a day where, like, maybe, I have a bad night, I sleep it off, and then, reset the next day. But I just can't allow anything to like steal that amount of time. Steals your joy. Absolutely. So, the one thing I wanted to kind of circle back, we had kind of touched on it briefly, but I'd like to hear a little bit more in depth. I think in the military, burnt out, we, maybe drink a little bit more than we should. We have these things where, it's socially acceptable, no one really notices. But some people are stuck in this negative mindset for a slew of different reasons. But what is the best way? Because I feel like back to it's only slightly inconvenient, like you'll just kind of continue. What's the best way to break these negative mindsets and break the cycle? Or do you have to identify it first? Maybe that's the first problem. Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious with those things. Sometimes I am nervous about some of those goals and things like that. I mean, I love goals. I love seeing people accomplish their goals. Are you at all afraid if you set something too high? I mean, obviously, want to shoot for the stars, but are you worried if you don't accomplish it that you'll have, comparison and have trouble, processing that portion? Or do you make it achievable enough? Mm, absolutely. Atomic Habits, right, by James Clear. He talks about that 1%. 1% is, the right direction. He says, like, you're going to go one direction or another. You're going to get worse or you're going to get better. Like, those are the only two options. A lot of people are like, no, I'm just going to maintain. But his argument is like, no, you're just going to get better or worse. Like, those are the only two. Because I think back to the slowly, like, slightly inconvenient, I'll just maintain. But I think if you look at it that way, like, am I going to get better today? Or am I going to get worse? Am I going to go for the walk and, go around the block for a run? Or made to sit on the couch, because sitting on the couch is probably going to get worse, even though I'm sure we'd like to believe it's maintaining. So I'd love to ask some examples. We went over some real world tips, which is probably my favorite part. I think a lot of times in the trainings and different things we do, we talk about hypotheticals and things like that. So I love that we touched on real world tips and tricks. That's awesome. But I'd like to hear some examples of a time when a small mental health habit or mindset shift made a big difference for you or someone you've worked with. Hmm. So funny story. Sorry to interrupt, but we moved in the middle of it. And the military, the thing they do is they write down your inventory of all the things you have. One of the sheets they have is the high value list. It's supposed to be for your TVs and things like that. So the guy, I mean, partly a joke, but he wrote the toilet paper on the high value list because no one could get it. A weird time. That's a wild. I mean, that's almost exactly what we were talking about with like that shock. Sometimes it seems like you need the big shock. Like your life was fine. It wasn't like awful, but the shock of, these different things. And I feel like a lot of times they're usually health related, that really wake us up. But that's awesome to hear like that just shift in mindset. Like the situation's still the same. Just the mindset shift was really what got you on track and things are going great. You're trying to accomplish some goals and do some different things. That is really awesome. So finally, I wanted to ask you, after we talked, nearly an hour, a lot of good stuff today, what's one key takeaway or piece of advice you hope listeners will remember as they work on their own mental health in a chaotic world? Ugh, ugh. That's perfect. I always try to think of WD-40. Everyone has it. It's a household name, but it took 39 crappy recipes until they got to WD-40, whatever WD stands for. But those people like have crazy amounts of money and everyone has it, but they didn't get, it's not WD-1, it's WD-40. So, well, PJ, thank you for coming out. Right? Isn't that crazy? 39 just bad. I'm assuming they're all bad. Maybe they were somewhat okay, but I'd like to think they were really bad. But PJ, thank you for coming on the show. I encourage listeners to share their thoughts. Social media, got the Facebook page. The audio will come out on all the wonderful platforms that you listen to podcasts. Try to get some videos up on Instagram and TikTok. I'm old, so I'm still trying to figure out social media, but I'll get some clips out. But I love you all. See ya.